Disneyland.
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are.
Each week as you enter this timeless land, one of these many worlds will open to you. Tomorrowland, promise of things to come. Fantasyland, the happiest kingdom of them all. Frontierland, tall tales and true from the legendary past. Adventureland, the wonder world of nature's own realm. Presenting this week from Adventureland, Cameras in Samoa and The Holland Story. And now your host, Walt Disney.
Ever since I was very young, I've always been curious about the folks who live over the hill and on the other side of the river. But I guess this kind of curiosity is a universal complaint. There's not much doubt that people everywhere are interested in people everywhere. Of course, theater tickets cost a lot less than steamer tickets. And for those who prefer to do their globe-trotting at the movies, we've been making, for some time now, a series of motion pictures called People and Places. To film these pictures, we have photographers staked out all over the world. The stories behind the People and Places cameras are always interesting, and it's time for one now. So here to tell it is Winston Hibbler.
The job of a People and Places cameraman is usually difficult, sometimes dangerous. And quite often it means working under the most unfavorable conditions. In the burning wastes of the Sahara Desert, on the frozen shores of Greenland. But here's a case where the photographer drew an assignment in paradise. The place, Polynesia, a scattered group of islands far out in the broad Pacific. In the heart of Polynesia lies Samoa, which means sacred center. Samoa was formed untold ages ago by great volcanic peaks thrusting up from the ocean floor. The coastline presents a study in contrasts. In some places, palm trees form a backdrop for long sweeps of coral sand. In others, jutting boulders and high palisades form a coastline as rugged as the rocky shores of New England. Inland, Samoa is a place of high mountains and deep rainforests. The faraway places of the world are familiar grounds to photographer Herbert Knapp and his wife Trudy, for it was they who filmed our motion picture, Siam. To photograph the story of Samoa, they were to spend more than a year traveling over twisting jungle trails, moving constantly from village to village. In the beginning, the Knapps and their cameras were such a novelty, they couldn't bring the curious Samoan youngsters under control, even with a bribe of candy. But finally, the fascination wore off, and the children went back to the pleasant business of just being children. And that was when Herb was able to get his camera rolling to film the Samoan way of life, literally from the ground up. Among the younger males, one of the favorite pastimes is this game of marbles, played with rounded pebbles and a finger-flipping technique. It's unorthodox, but unerring. In fact, in the hands of a Samoan boy, a rock is such a deadly weapon, the island fathers have enacted laws prohibiting the hurling of stones at anything except other stones. A photographer intent on his work, plus an unguarded case of camera equipment, plus an uncontrollable case of curiosity, equals a lot of fun for the youngster, but one big headache for Herb. This was unexposed film. But of course, any Samoan can tell you a touch of sun never hurt anything. Besides, he's going to put it back when he gets through. Of course, the best way to keep little hands out of trouble is to keep them busy. And each father teaches his son the ancient skills and arts of his ancestors. Fire making is man's work, and a man is never too young to learn. 2 sticks of softwood are used, such as fau, or if you prefer, fua will do just as well. That's all there is to it. All right, son, carve yourself a fire stick and fire away. Now comes the rub. But first you must dampen the rubbing stick in the earth. Well, when it's a fellow's first fire, he ought to be allowed a few fumbles. But perhaps there are some things a man's too young to learn. In Samoa, rain squalls are a part of everyday life. In fact, the average rainfall here is over 100 inches annually. For a newcomer, the best thing in such a downpour is a store-bought umbrella, but not for the natives. They can find one on every tree. Besides, for Samoan youngsters, wet weather's the best kind. Just the thing for boat racing. Even after the rain has stopped, the water sports continue. This mad melee is a sort of seagoing hockey game, played in a welter of water and a clash of clubs. There's no teamwork here, it's every man for himself. And if you're really smart, you stay out of reach on the beach. And so with lots of spirit and plenty of splash, the game goes on and on till the tide goes out. The outstanding characteristic of a Samoan village is the architecture of the dwellings, and Herb was fortunate in being able to film the actual building of a Samoan fale, which means house. It's a community project, and bringing in the center post is a matter of some ceremony. In raising the center post, no plumb lines or levels are used. It's brought into true by eye alone. No nails or bolts are needed. Everything's lashed together with senet, the all-purpose twine of Samoa, made from coconut fibers. Thatching of sugarcane leaves defies torrential rain or tropical sun, and the open walls provide air conditioning. In filming our People and Places motion picture of Samoa, Herb Knapp kept the camera rolling and Trudy kept the notes. Here they're recording the making of a ceremonial tapa cloth. It begins by stripping bark from the saplings of the mulberry tree, but only the soft inner fibers are used. To keep the material workable, it must be kept moist, and so cleaning and scraping takes place in a convenient creek. To form a wide cloth, the strips are welded together by pounding. And knot holes are patched at the same time. Intricately carved tablets called pattern boards are used to stain a design into the tapa cloth. Good workmanship demands that the colors go completely through the material. And as a matter of pride, each artisan makes her own dyes, in this case with a piece of reddish rock-like earth. In the final touch-up, a twig brush and a dye solution give a glossy appearance to the finished design. Since tapa cloth is limited to ceremonial use, the island artisans devote much of their time to the more commonplace job of making mats. The material is pandanus leaves with the spiny edges removed. Next, the leaves tied into loose rolls are put into a steam bath. After about half an hour, the strips are soft, spongy, and ready to be separated. Next, a series of washings and rinsings bleaches the material to a variety of shades ranging from straw yellow to near white. Finally, segregated according to size, the strips are laid out to dry. Samoan mats aren't actually woven. The process is known as plaiting. And girl children learn the art while still very young, for a woman's community standing is judged by her skill in mat making. Samoan household, mats serve as rugs, blankets, mattresses, and partitions. And so house cleaning and redecorating merely means airing and rearranging the mats. To earn the prized title of fine mat, the cross strands must number at least 12 to the inch. And these are the family jewels, the wealth of Samoa. When a Samoan is to be highly honored, he's usually presented with a fine mat. This is a carpenter who's done an outstanding job. The brief but spectacular dance is traditional. It expresses his gratitude for the award. In Samoa, there's one activity reserved exclusively for women, drawing water from the village well. But this is subject to rigid rules. The household container must be left at a prescribed distance. A white lava must be worn when approaching the well. And the coconut dipper may be used for no other purpose. Violation of these taboos results in deep disgrace, plus a fine, payable in mats, coconuts, or labor. A large part of the Samoan diet comes from the surrounding sea. So Herb Knapp spent many hours filming the fishing activities around the island. Here again, the finer points of an ancient art are handed down from father to son. Almost every kind of tackle is used, from the fishing spear to the net. Women are restricted to fishing along the shore, for it's an island taboo that only men may fish from the canoes. To film the fishing fleet in action, it was necessary to take the camera far out to an offshore coral reef. Our People in Places camera also caught the more daring fishermen who take their cockleshell canoes into the great rolling seas that lie beyond the reef. Some have ventured out here never to return, for there are sharks in these waters. But although the hazards are greater, the water is deeper and the fish are bigger. And after a day spent in deep water, the fisherman usually has something to brag about. The big one that didn't get away. Although Herb's main job was to film the Samoan way of life, there was another phase to his assignment too. He was to photograph the marine life of these tropical waters for a true life adventure we're preparing about islands of the sea. Handling the equipment necessary for the underwater camera work calls for something more substantial than an outrigger canoe. And so two Samoans have bound their craft together in this common cause. The clear waters surrounding Samoa are ideal for the underwater camera box. And one of the regular residents here is the octopus, sinister looking, but in reality quite harmless. Yet these quiet lagoons have dangerous denizens too, the moray eel. Right now, he's intent on filching food from a sea anemone. To film our story of Samoa, Herb and Trudy Knapp would often travel over rough and hazardous terrain. There's one popular Samoan playground that lies in a most unlikely and almost inaccessible place. It's a series of cascades tumbling down a steep mountainside. The attraction here is Samoa's famous sliding rock, volcanic lava, worn smooth by countless centuries of rushing water, and many generations of sliding Samoans. This is rough sport, but that doesn't rule out the ladies. Whenever a village could be reached by road, the Knapp station wagon was converted into an outdoor sound studio. For the motion picture screen, the Knapps filmed Samoa in full-color cinemascope. And now to complete the story, with their tape recorder, they captured the melodic heartbeat of the island. In Samoa, music is a rhythmic, fluent language that every islander speaks, each in his own fashion. course, along with the music, there's always dancing, impromptu and spontaneous, as young and old alike express their light-hearted way of life. These are the people, and this is the place of our motion picture, Samoa. It's a colorful, happy picture, for surely no people are more contented and carefree than these. Nor is any island place more beautiful than their lovely homeland, Samoa, a sacred center in Polynesia. It's time now for our story of Holland. But you'll find this different from our usual people and places story. In Holland, our cameras were witness to one of the worst national disasters the world has ever known. However, we'll let these tragic chapters fall in their proper chronological order and begin our story where Holland itself began. Far back in the early days of Europe's history, the rivers Rhine, Maas, and Schelde converged to form a great floodplain on the western coast. In this place of sandy marshes and low-lying islands lived a tribe of primitive people. To lift their crude huts above the level of the tidewaters, they fashioned miniature hills of sand and stone. So they were known as the mound dwellers. Storm winds combined with high tides often brought disaster and devastation to these tiny bits of land. But the mound dwellers always fought back. Eventually, they developed a system of defenses against storm and tide, crude barricades of clay and willow. And in time, these barricades became the first dikes of Holland. Today, 2,000 years later, the people of the Dutch nation are still building dikes. And passing centuries have seen little change in their methods or materials. First, willow branches are tied together in long, flexible cables. Then at low tide, the cables are laid out in sweeping curves to fit the contours of the beach. They'll prevent the sand from shifting, and at the same time form the mainstays for a thick mattress of reeds. After the mattress has been carefully roped and pegged down, it's topped off with an interlaced covering of straw. When the foundation is laid, the heavy work begins. Centuries of dike building have long since used up the rock supply from Holland's alluvial soil, and so these basalt blocks must be imported from England. Carefully fitted together, they form the base for the final step, a mixture of crushed rock and clay spread and tamped down over the entire surface. Yet the dikes of Holland are more than heaps of stone and earth. Each is also a monument of victory in the 2,000-year struggle to wrest land from the sea. Behind the 1,000-mile rampart of protecting dikes lie the Dutch Netherlands. Here where the gray waters of the North Sea once rolled, a land has been made to bloom. A lush and lovely land. A land where tulips are a field crop. Where industry is a heritage. And love for the land a tradition. Symbol of Holland is the windmill. Some are pumps that keep the lowlands dry. Others are sawmills, and this happens to be a grist mill. To put his mill in motion, the miller cranks the vanes into the eye of the wind. Then, like a good sailor, a good miller knows just how much canvas he can safely carry. When everything's shipshape, a slight tug overcomes inertia, and the wind takes over. Next to the mills, canals are the most familiar features of a Dutch landscape. They come in all sizes, large and small, as well as low and high. In some places, from a lowland meadow, you can watch the masts of an ocean-going boat glide by at treetop level. Country roads are few, and most of them end abruptly at the canals, for these are the real highways of Holland. Altogether, they measure over 5,000 miles, and more than 50% of Holland's transportation is by water. The largest city in the Dutch Netherlands is Amsterdam. It's often called the Venice of the North. There are over 50 canals here, yet pleasure craft are almost non-existent. The waterways of Amsterdam are arteries of industry. In this city, the youngsters who play in the streets must content themselves with water sports. There are over 400 bridges in Amsterdam, all well-traveled. And here comes one doing its own traveling. It's a rule of the road that a bridge on a bank must swing aside to let a bridge on a barge by. When the frigid winds of winter sweep in from the North Sea, the harbor at Amsterdam will occasionally freeze. As a rule, it's soft saltwater ice, and even a ferry boat is an adequate icebreaker. But the freshwater ice in the inland canals is a different matter. Here, the freeze-up presents a serious problem. Ice pressure could easily damage the mechanism of the locks, and a sprung gate is an open invitation to flood. So the strain must be relieved. Of course, when the canals freeze, commerce comes to a halt. And when there's no work to be done, the Dutch people are ready to play. Ice skating is a favorite form of winter recreation. But there are other ways of getting around on the ice, and modes of transportation are limited only by the imagination. On the frozen lakes, one of the popular pastimes is sail skating. For those who like the feel of a stout craft beneath them, there's ice boating. In Holland, they simply set a sailboat on a set of runners and set sail. There's one big advantage to this arrangement. If the ice should break, you can always sail the boat home. To the click of wooden shoes, the festivals of midwinter are celebrated by dancing on the ice. summer comes again to the Holland countryside, the scenes along the canals are a flowing pastoral of the picturesque. Although the Dutch people have handmade their land into a place of peaceful beauty, nature controls the elements. Storm and tide, wind and wave. Against each of these elements, the Dutch have learned to defend themselves. But sometimes nature combines her forces in unpredictable patterns of titanic fury, and the result is chaos. And now, this is Holland in January of 1953, a time of anxiety and foreboding. The high tides of spring have yet to come, but already the sea has crept into the coastal harbors and stands persistently at a dangerous level. Among the Dutch people, the tension rises with each passing hour. They watch and wait, and cannot know that even now, nature is preparing an elemental cataclysm never equaled in Holland's history. High up in the polar regions, a giant storm moves ominously out of its spawning ground. Gaining strength and speed, it sweeps southeastward over the Arctic Circle. Crossing the North Sea, the winds reach hurricane force, driving before them huge waves. And now these mountains of water begin their battering assault upon the sea defenses of Holland. By late evening, the storm is in full fury. And with malevolent timing, the first spring tide arrives to lift the waters still higher. Disaster is in the making here. As the dikes give way one by one, the North Sea rolls unchecked into the lowlands. Throughout the night, the flood spreads across the countryside, death and destruction riding the angry waters. Sunday morning, February 1st. Across the world, in many languages, newspapers headline a story of appalling disaster.
50.000 mensen moeten worden geëvacueerd.
Près de 1000 morts, milliers de disparus, ravages incalculables.
Dutch fight for life as sea surges inland.
Millions stricken in flood disaster. Death toll rises.
Dawn in the Netherlands reveals a terrible victory of water over the land. And still the flood races further inland, invading areas that haven't known the touch of salt water in centuries.
rescue craft are few, and the homeless number in the thousands. But the Dutch people have learned to face disaster without despair. They accept defeat, but only temporarily. For the sake of future generations, the sea must once again be driven from the land. By noon, the flood has reached its peak, and the fertile lowlands have once again become a part of the cold North Sea. Everywhere, the story is the same. Devastated farms, stricken villages, a story of terrible tragedy. And now the reckoning. The Vispas area, 85% inundated. The island of Hooray Overflakke, 90% inundated. Schouwen-Duiven land, 90% inundated. And so all across the southern Netherlands. The crosses number the dead by tens. In the dike system, there are more than 500 breaches. But already reconstruction has begun. Here on the coast of Schouwen-Duiven land is a typical major break. Successive tides have gouged a great hole in the ocean floor at the center of the breach, making a straight-across repair impossible. And so a shoulder dike must be built to bypass this undersea depression. To form the new seawall, concrete caissons will be used, and they're already on the way. Caissons come in all sizes. These are 7,000-ton giants, leftovers from the Normandy invasion of World War II. Repairing the massive breaches along the coast calls for an all-out effort. Yet Holland doesn't fight alone. Many nearby nations send convoys of men and material to aid in the battle against the sea. As soon as the big caissons arrive on the scene, the task force is complete. Construction begins, however, with smaller caissons. They're carefully floated into position, then sunk by opening sea valves in the bottom. At low tide, tugboats keep the caissons in place, while extra weight is added to hold them permanently in position. Repairing a sea dike is a constant battle against time, for with every running of the tide, the torrent of rushing water makes work not only dangerous, but practically impossible. As the tide ebbs again, the new dike sections are covered over, and now only a narrow gap remains. Here, weighted willow mattresses are being laid to form a foundation for the big caissons. During the hours of darkness, the job is doubly difficult and dangerous, yet the work must not stop. With the coming of dawn, the time has come for the final step in this giant operation. So far, this much has been accomplished. The two arms of the shoulder dike have been completed, and in the center gap, caissons 1, 2, and 3 have been sunk in position. Now caisson 4 will be floated in to plug the last narrow opening. This is a critical and complex maneuver, and it must be completed while the tide is slack, which allows less than 10 minutes for towing the caisson into place and sinking it exactly in the right position.
Voorzichtig. Kijk uit. Dat is goed. Gooi je touw. Lekker. 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 Trekken. 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 Kom eens aan trekken. Ja, daar komt hij. Hou het iets zwaaien.
The caisson is guided by skilled hands, and it slides into place with a ponderous precision. Now between the caissons, only minor gaps remain, and these are easily sealed with a series of pilings. Holland's battle with the floods is won. It's taken over 200 caissons, a 2.5-mile shoulder dike, to repair this massive breach, the largest in the entire dike system. And now floating pumps immediately move in and begin the job of draining the enclosed area. Bit by bit, the skeleton of a drowned land appears. In an orchard, partly submerged trees burst into bloom, yet they're already dying from salt water in their roots. The blossoms are a final fruitless effort to continue life. The only thing that remains untouched by the flood is the spirit of the Dutch people. Even while the defeated floodwaters still lap at window level, they return to their homes. More than 40,000 homes have been damaged, and restoring these is a task to rival the labors of Hercules. And those who can solve their problems just by cleaning are fortunate, for more than 9,000 homes have been totally destroyed and must be rebuilt from the ground up. Public utilities are overhauled and brought back into service. And the ancient windmills are rethatched in the time-honored Dutch tradition. In the low-lying fields of the countryside, each day's pumping exposes new salvage problems, and the mark of the sea is everywhere. The all-important drainage canals are mud-choked and useless. Until these are cleared, the land cannot be completely dried out. In the rural villages, farmers prepare to reclaim their farms by first reclaiming the farm equipment. Under its crust of salt, the land seems lost and lifeless. And yet no Dutchman has ever abandoned 1 square foot of Dutch soil. And he attacks the problem of saltwater contamination by first breaking the salt crust with a plow. And then the field is sowed with powdered gypsum, a mineral that helps to neutralize the sodium salts. This, in turn, is worked into the soil and allowed to aerate, and then the whole process is repeated several times. By the following season, the ground is ready to be planted. And at harvest time, an ancient history has repeated itself. Courage and determination have driven the sea from the land, and the land repays in full measure the spirit and faith of the Dutch people. Only when the long and arduous task of reconstruction is finished do the Dutch celebrate with a traditional festival. With this pageant of victory, our story of Holland ends. Yet flood will always be a part of the Dutch tomorrow, for the sea is a persistent and relentless enemy. And so the land of Holland must always be a place where the price of existence is eternal war with the eternal sea.
Next week, our show will come to you from Fantasyland. You will see how Donald Duck connives with his 3 nephews to convince me that he has licked his voice problems and is qualified to be a master of ceremonies on a Disneyland show. Here are a few highlights from that show.
Next week, Walt Disney discovers that Donald Duck has found a new voice.
Okay, Donald, go ahead. What's your big surprise?
How do you do, Mr. Disney? And greetings to you, my television audience.
Why, Donald, I can understand every word you say.
This enables one...
Aided and abetted by a very unreliable loudspeaker, operated by his mischievous nephews, Donald will be master of ceremonies for next week's show.
Up to now, you've visited only one land a week, but my show is going to be a spectacular. On my super-duper colossal, you're going to get 4 shows in one.
And super-duper spectacular it is. In Adventureland, that intrepid explorer, Sir Donald Duck, takes you to the jungles of South America for his version of a true-life adventure.
Howdy, partners.
In Frontierland, Donald takes you back to the perilous days of the covered wagons to show you how his ancestors made the hazardous trek to California.
No, sir. Weren't the Red Man. We're the Red Ant.
You'll tingle with excitement in Tomorrowland when Donald becomes the pilot of the first rocket ship to blast off into outer space. And as a grand climax, in Fantasyland, you'll meet the world's greatest actor.
Me, Donald Duck. According to the script, I'm to be cast as a hobo.
Yes, Donald will show you how he thinks a television show should be run when he takes you on a hectic trip through Adventureland, Frontierland, Tomorrowland, and Fantasyland. Next week, when Walt Disney brings you your host, Donald Duck. Look in your newspaper for the theater near you where you can see Walt Disney's exciting new motion picture, Johnny Tremaine. Johnny Tremaine, the story of rebellious men and courageous youth who dared to stand against an army. Johnny Tremaine is thrilling motion picture entertainment for the whole family. The story of youths who shared in the dangers of America's most violent days, full of adventure, intrigue, and drama. Watch your newspaper for the theater near you where you can see Johnny Tremaine. This has been an ABC Television Network film presentation.